My name is Kristen, and I am currently working from home as an illustrator. Steve and I have been married for 15 years now. We have a son named Alex, who is in his second year of middle school. He has a mischievous side, and as he is going through puberty, each day feels like it slightly wears on my heart. Currently, our family is living with Steve's parents, a situation that came about at the suggestion of my in-laws. Steve has two sisters. One is married and has left home, while the other remains unemployed and mostly stays in her room. We agreed to live together following their request for support. However, this living arrangement has become a significant source of stress for me. Initially, my in-laws were kind, but over time, they began to become more demanding. When working from home, I am criticized as if I were just playing around, and when doing housework, I am told to clean more thoroughly. Without understanding my work from home situation, attempts to explain are dismissed as making excuses. As a result, I have given up on trying to convince or explain to them. I have explained the situation to my husband and asked for his intervention more than once or twice. When Steve spoke to his parents about my work, they dismissed it, saying, "It probably doesn't turn much, and it's just play, not work," and he did not argue further. It's clear I am not just playing around. I have seriously acquired clients, and while my annual income was $50,000 when we got married, it has now grown to $100,000, and I work with numerous companies. I believe Steve understood this, but his true feelings remain unclear. This situation has continued for 15 years, but I do not intend to endure it indefinitely. I have been secretly saving money, and I am close to reaching my goal. Once the goal is achieved, I plan to buy a luxurious high-rise condo and start a new life there with Steve and Alex. Steve agrees with this plan, and I am looking forward to a promising future. "Steve, we're almost at our target amount," I said to my husband, who was browsing on his phone in bed after finishing housework and work. He glanced at me and responded with a lackluster hum. His reaction disheartened me, and I lost the energy to continue the conversation, sighing deeply. "Don't you like it?" "It's not that I don't like it. I'm just wondering how to tell my parents," Steve murmured while fiddling with his phone. Indeed. We have not yet informed his parents about our plan to purchase the condo. However, I was not deeply troubled by this matter. I thought that once the condo's paperwork was advanced to a stage where cancellation was impossible, his parents would have no choice but to accept it. This turned out to be the right approach. After a few months, I managed to save the target amount and successfully acquired the high-rise condo, which is in Steve's name. Although I earn more, the uncertainty of my home-based work made us decide it was safer to have the property in his name, as he has a relatively stable job. Preparations went smoothly, and as the moving day approached, we decided to inform his parents about the move and the purchase of the condo. They were surprised when they learned about the condo but ultimately raised no objections. A few days after the discussion, we moved into the luxurious high-rise condo as planned and started our new life as a family of three for the first time since our marriage. We managed to acquire a spacious home with a 5-room layout, including a bedroom for us, a room for Alex, and a workspace for me, where I can comfortably progress my work with no issues. We were enjoying our happy times when, shortly after moving, a request came from a well-known company I contracted with asking me to visit their office. The company is quite a distance from our current high-rise condo, requiring an airplane flight to visit. Moreover, a day trip would be challenging, necessitating an overnight stay. Despite this, I was required to stay at the company for about 3 days, engaging in various meetings that necessitated illustration work. Consequently, I arranged a 4-night, 5-day schedule, shared the information with my husband, Steve, and departed for the state where the company is located a few days later. The meetings with the company concluded smoothly, and I returned to our high-rise condo the following day. Exhausted, I bought some prepared food on my way home and arrived around 6 p.m. Since it was a holiday, I expected Steve to be home. However, upon opening the front door, I discovered several unfamiliar shoes lined up, which at first made me think Alex's friends had visited. But it was clear those weren't the shoes of youngsters. Wondering if perhaps they belonged to Steve's colleagues, I quietly made my way to the living room and slowly opened the door. There, I saw my in-laws relaxing at the dining table. "Excuse me." I approached my in-laws with surprise and greeted them, to which they cheerfully responded, "Welcome back, we're happy to see you." However, I was too perplexed to reply. At that moment, Steve, who had been watching TV, came over to us, and I gave him a look that demanded an explanation. He casually mentioned that after telling his mother about my 4-night, 5-day absence, she decided to come over right away. "Leaving your son and grandson for a trip? What were you thinking? His mother reproachfully commented after Steve's explanation. No, it wasn't a trip. I hurriedly corrected her misunderstanding, but the looks on my in-laws' faces were clearly skeptical. Lies are unacceptable. Was that your purpose for leaving the house? My father-in-law raised his voice at me, and my mother-in-law joined him with a menacing look. Could it be that you're engaging in infidelity? My mother-in-law snared, casting a contemptuous gaze and mocking words at me. I'm completely innocent of such actions. It was for work purposes. I raised my voice in defense against the baseless accusation. Your agitation is suspicious. My mother-in-law laughed, sipping her coffee and taking a deep breath. Is that really so? Steve cast a cold glance at me, seemingly taking his mother's words at face value. However, I had already thoroughly explained the situation to Steve and provided evidence to prove it, even sending him photos taken with colleagues at the business trip. Yet, I was frustrated that he harbored doubts, believing his mother's words. By the way, we've decided to move in here. What? Amid my frustration with Steve, this unexpected statement came from my mother-in-law. To ensure this doesn't happen again in the future, we thought it's necessary to supervise. We've also started the process of selling the house. Moreover, we've changed the ownership of this condo into Dad's name. My mother-in-law continued with surprising comments before I could catch up. I was completely bewildered and looked at Steve for help. He avoided my gaze, clearly confused. What do you mean you've changed the ownership? That's not something simple, is it? Seemingly amused by my distress, my mother-in-law looked at me with a smile. The process wasn't that complicated. As if avoiding further explanation, she stood up and left for the living room where the TV was. At that point, I could only rely on Steve. Later, I took Steve to the bedroom to urge him to explain the situation, but he began to speak reluctantly. It turned out my in-laws had taken a liking to the high-rise condo on the day they visited and decided to move in immediately. Furthermore, considering that Steve's sister would be left with nothing, they preferred to invite her in as well rather than her having nothing. Steve, not fully understanding the details, had casually agreed and changed the ownership to his father's name during my absence. As a result of the change in ownership, we were faced with inheritance and gift taxes. However, my in-laws did not have the funds to pay these taxes, and we ended up having to use our savings to cover the cost. The savings were intended for my son Alex's future, considering the inevitable expenses that would arise. I couldn't help but feel a boiling rage towards my husband Steve and my in-laws for what they had done. However, dwelling on what had already happened was futile, so I had no choice but to accept it. The thought of parting ways with Steve crossed my mind with the resumption of living with my in-laws and sister-in-law, but considering Alex, I couldn't make a clear decision. We returned to the same life with my in-laws as before. Days of mental strain revisited me, but fortunately, work kept me busy enough not to dwell on it much. However, a significant event that would decide my feelings occurred. A month after my in-laws and sister-in-law started living with us, I was once again asked to participate in a meeting with that company. This time it was supposed to be short, requiring only an overnight stay. Despite hesitations due to the presence of my in-laws, it was still part of my work. In discussions with Steve, the initial accusations of infidelity raised by my mother-in-law were brought up, but after promising communication with the company, post-visit activities, and photo sharing, it was eventually agreed that I could go without any issues. So, I'll be leaving now. I greeted my mother-in-law, who was relaxing in the living room on the day of departure, but received no response. My father-in-law, watching TV, glanced at me for a moment but returned to his screen without showing much interest. Without saying anything more to them, I left the high-rise condo. After completing the meeting, I returned home the next afternoon. I'm back, I announced to my in-laws in the living room, then immediately headed to my office to resume work. However, the room was empty, with many of the materials that were supposed to be there gone. At first, I couldn't understand the situation and why everything had disappeared, but I quickly realized it was the work of my in-laws and confronted them. Mother, all the materials in my office are gone. Where did you put them? What are you making such a fuss about? She retorted when I hurried into the room, momentarily taken aback but then starting to sip her tea with an accustomed demeanor. Those books and documents, they were essential for my work. And that work? Filled with drawings that don't seem practical? Despite my earnest explanation, my mother-in-law laughed dismissively, unwilling to listen. Those were very important to me. Where did you put them? You're so noisy. We've already disposed of them, she said that while showing annoyance and eventually admitting to throwing them away. I was speechless at her words, finding myself unable to say anything more to her. Mia needs her own room. She can't always be with us. My mother-in-law explained that after moving, there wasn't enough room, so my sister-in-law had been sharing with my in-laws. However, exhausted by my sister-in-law's late-night activities, my in-laws decided without consulting me to give her my office, which stored materials and artwork crucial for my work. These were of immeasurable value to me. Hearing that my things were disposed of, I silently returned to my office from the living room. How much time had passed? While lying on the floor, devoid of motivation, Alex came into the room. "Mom, is something wrong?" Noticing Alex had come home and it was already dark outside, I responded, yeah, I'm fine. Welcome back." After he opened the door and saw the state of the office, he looked at me silently. "Did something happen?" While puzzled by his reaction, I asked with a smile, only for him to look back at me seriously. "Mom, aren't you going to divorce?" His unexpected question left me speechless. "I know. Grandma and Grandpa have been harsh on you, and Dad isn't supporting you, right?" Alex stood in front of me, turning on the light and sitting down on the floor. I couldn't grasp his words immediately, just staring back at him. "If things keep going like this, you'll get sick," he said before leaving the room. Immediately after, I received a summons from my mother-in-law and was ordered to start preparing dinner right away, so I quickly began the meal preparations. Even while cooking dinner, the words my son Alex had uttered were racing through my mind. I had been postponing the decision to divorce, considering my son, but never expected him to actually bring up the subject of divorce. The fact that my son made such a statement was a huge shock to me. However, that incident solidified my decision to divorce, and the next day, I promptly obtained a divorce form from the city hall. That evening, as soon as my husband Steve returned home, I presented the divorce form in front of my in-laws. "What's this?" Steve looked over the divorce form, not fully grasping its significance. "What's going on?" My mother-in-law approached to check the form immediately after. "Wait, what's this?" "A divorce form." Her seemingly pleased remark made it clear to Steve that I wanted a divorce, and he suddenly focused on me. "Let's get a divorce." Upon my declaration, Steve's complexion turned pale rapidly. "Why all of a sudden?" He slammed the table vehemently, pressing me for an answer. "Well, I think it's entirely reasonable. After all, you were a wife who couldn't show much skill in either household chores or your profession." My mother-in-law said that half-jokingly, pushing the conversation further towards me as my husband panicked. Caught off guard by her unexpected words, Steve paused and turned to look at my mother-in-law. "Perhaps, if a wife in such a situation were to leave, you might find yourself free again," she suggested to Steve. "Honestly, you don't need a wife like her." My father-in-law also took the opportunity to express a similar sentiment to Steve. Faced with a series of comments from the family, Steve hesitated but ultimately seemed to agree and decided to sign the divorce form, handing it to me. "I sincerely thank you." I took the signed divorce form and went to my son Alex's room, expressing deep gratitude. Upon opening the room, Alex was immersed in studying or something else, concentrated at his desk. "Alex, we're going to be leaving this place," I softly said to his back, and he put down his pen and slowly turned towards me. "I understand." Alex responded quietly yet firmly, and then turned back to continue what he was doing. Receiving my son's understanding response, I gently closed the door and began preparing for what was to come in the house. I quickly arranged the moving preparations and submitted the divorce form at the city hall the following day. After Steve signed the divorce form, it took only about a week for me and my son to leave the house and take the first step towards starting a new life. Facing a new beginning, my son and I held hope for the future, determined to move forward while leaving the past behind. Since the new residence was already decided, I arranged for movers to transport our belongings, and during the process, I made one last visit to the living room to bid farewell to my in-laws. However, my in-laws ignored my presence, not giving me a second glance. "Thank you for everything," I said politely, but received no response from them. "I hope you continue to work hard on the payments," I added with a hint of sarcasm, which made my mother-in-law turn to me abruptly. "What do you mean by that?" she asked. "The monthly payments for the high-rise condo, $3,500. Good luck with that. You think you've won? It's clear that without our son, your lives won't be sustainable." My mother-in-law sneered. "No, we'll be fine," I calmly replied. My mother-in-law approached me with a displeased look. "What do you mean you'll be fine? Even now, you're putting on a brave face." She confronted me. "I'm just stating the facts. Actually, I have an income," I quietly counted. This was a fact unknown to my in-laws. At one time, Steve was very capable and earned more than me. However, due to the recent worsening economic situation and the loss of his position, Steve's income has significantly decreased. Now, Steve's salary is less than mine, and to be honest, his income alone is barely enough to make the payments for the high-rise condo's mortgage. Impossible. Are you insulting Steve? My mother-in-law angrily confronted me, her face showing her fury at my statement. I'm just stating the facts. If he has to pay a $3,500 mortgage, there's hardly anything left for other living expenses, I calmly replied. How have you been managing to live up to now then? My mother-in-law retorted. She had not been aware of the situation with my work and seemed to believe that I had no income of my own. So, she must have thought that the mortgage and daily living expenses were all being covered by Steve's earnings. As my mother-in-law began to show signs of confusion, I couldn't help but smile. Seeing this, she became even more infuriated. If you're going to live here, please make sure to pay the monthly mortgage of $3,500, I said calmly and thanked my father-in-law, who was sitting frozen on the sofa, before leaving the room. That night, as expected, I received a call from Steve. The subject of the call was indeed about the mortgage for the high-rise condo. It seemed Steve had not thought about the mortgage issue until he heard from my mother-in-law and hurriedly contacted me. Hey, what's this $3,500 about? He said over the phone. His confusion was evident through the phone. What do you mean? It has been like that since the time of purchase, I responded coolly. What, really? But there's no way we can afford that. Steve argued, probably not remembering the details. I'm no longer concerned with that matter. Goodbye, I said and promptly hung up the phone. Immediately after, I stopped accepting any calls from Steve or my in-laws. From that moment, I felt completely relieved, filled with a sense of serves them right towards them. Later, I learned from a colleague and friend of Steve's about what happened next. Steve ended up in deep debt due to failing to keep up with the loan payments and was eventually driven to bankruptcy. Naturally, my in-laws and sister-in-law didn't have the funds to make the payments either and also faced bankruptcy. Steve managed to keep his job but now has to support not only himself but also the other three, taking up night jobs and becoming increasingly worn out day by day. Moreover, Steve has reached the point of asking for financial assistance at work, completely ruining his credibility. Even former friends, including those from work, now avoid any association with him. There were even demands from Steve's parents for severance pay, indicating they were pushing him to quit his job, which only highlights the dire situation they're in. Perhaps this is their comeuppance for underestimating my profession and coveting the luxurious high-rise condo without knowing anything. Now, I live comfortably with my son, focused on my work, and feeling incredibly happy. Alright, finally managed to deliver. I'm glad I made it in time for this mince delivery. My name is Maggie. Since I was a child, I've loved drawing in sketchbooks with crayons and colored pencils, and that hobby has continued into my adulthood. When I was a student, I worked part-time drawing illustrations, which has become the foundation for my current career. Now, I'm enjoying a freelance life, drawing illustrations at my own pace. In addition to illustrations, I also create small comics depicting the daily lives of modern women in fashion magazines. I've heard encouraging words from my editor, like, Maggie's drawings get a lot of positive reactions from our readers. And through this job, I met my current husband. He held an important position at a major publishing company I was associated with, and initially, our relationship was strictly professional. However, as we worked together, we grew closer. We bonded over shared past experiences, like losing our fathers at an early age. Before we knew it, we were going out for meals and movies together. After one such meal, he confessed his feelings, and we started dating. I had never dated anyone before, so I lacked confidence at first. Really? You like someone like me? I don't stand out, and I'm just a bit better at drawing than the average person. That's not true. You're really talented, Maggie, and I love the way you utilize that talent to the fullest. His kind words made my heart flutter. After dating for several years, we decided to get married. After getting married, we enjoyed our newlywed life for a while. Both my husband and I were then approaching 30. I wondered if it was better to have children sooner rather than later. Then, one day, my husband proposed that we live with his mother. I was initially surprised, but I had always yearned for happy family moments since I grew up in a single-parent household after losing my father early on. So, I looked forward to living with my mother-in-law. Maggie, I have something to discuss. Actually, my mother wants to live with us. What do you think? Really? Hasn't your mother always lived alone at her place? Yes. She must have her own reasons for wanting this. I was surprised she brought it up to us, newlyweds, but I want to understand her feelings. I hadn't interacted much with my mother-in-law. The only occasions I could do so were during our wedding and other formal occasions. From the start, she seemed very warm and approachable. Her smile and kindness reassured me. My mother has been feeling lonely living by herself. I used to visit frequently, but I've been too busy recently. That must be hard for her. But if she wants to live together, it may be fun living together under one roof. Really? Of course. I don't mind, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you, Maggie. That really helps. So, we decided to live with my mother-in-law. My husband was pleased with my decision, and our new life as a family of 3 began. Maggie, what's your favorite food? I want to make something special for you. Thank you, mother-in-law. Let me help you with it. It's fine, Maggie. You relax here. Our cohabitation was going smoothly. My mother-in-law took care of most household chores. I was really grateful for her support, especially because I was exhausted from work. One day, my husband dropped a bombshell. Maggie, this might come as a shock, but I've been transferred to another region. What? Really? I was filled with confusion and anxiety at the sudden news of his transfer. Considering our recent cohabitation, I wondered how this would affect my relationship with my mother-in-law. I thought about ending our living arrangement but couldn't ask my mother-in-law due to the unavoidable nature of the transfer. I also pondered moving with him, but staying in the city was more convenient for my job. Thanks, Maggie. If you ever have concerns about living with my mother, let me know. I remember feeling a bit relieved by his words. Thank you, I understand. In the end, I decided to continue living with my mother-in-law, but this decision might have been a bit hasty. At first, our cohabitation was harmonious. We respected each other's preferences and shared household chores. However, after living together for a short while, my mother-in-law began to change her attitude towards me. She assumed I wasn't doing anything. Maggie, shouldn't you help out a bit more around the house? I'm sorry, I'm quite busy right now. I'm working on this tablet. You say such things, but you're just holed up in the house doing nothing. Even if you draw on that thing, there's no way you can make money from it. No, actually, I work using this tablet, and I support our household with my income. I've explained many times that I work from home, but my mother-in-law didn't believe me. She misunderstood me as a freeloader and asked me to help around the house. I intend to help with household chores as much as I can, but I'm busy with work and can't always help. So, I contribute by putting at least $3,000 from my income into the household every month. That's the money my son is giving you, isn't it? There's no way you can pay that amount yourself. No, that's not the case. I tried to explain again, but my mother-in-law wouldn't accept what I said. Despite explaining multiple times that I was contributing a significant amount from my income even though I couldn't help more with the chores, she continued to ignore my words. It was futile, no matter how politely I tried to explain. As time went on, her attitude towards me hardened and she began to berate me. She has never worked since getting married. She occasionally goes out shopping or for lunch with friends, but primarily stays home. Despite this, she was relentless in demanding that I help more around the house, even when I was working hard to support the family. As a result, it sometimes affected my work and caused inconveniences to my colleagues. Under these circumstances, it became difficult for me to maintain credibility and continue working. I needed to find a solution. Then, one day, while I was working in my room, my mother-in-law called out, "Maggie, come to the living room for a moment." I headed to the living room, tablet in hand, to find not only my mother-in-law but also my brother-in-law and his wife, still holding that tablet. "What are you doing?" "I drawing." "Maggie, you still love drawing even as an adult, huh?" My brother-in-law, whose demeanor and attitude were the polar opposite of mine, remarked sarcastically. He was always self-centered, and we've had many clashes even before my marriage, probably because of this. "I'm actually working on this tablet right now." "Work? You're just doodling, right?" LOL. My sister-in-law, with her usual domineering attitude, always looked down on me and threw snide remarks. "No, I'm drawing as a job. We heard from our mother that you can't do household chores or work properly. So, can't you just leave this house? From now on, we're going to live with Mom." They ridiculed and berated me. My mother-in-law looked pleased with the scene. It hurts to be treated this way by family. Since I had urgent work to do, I needed to focus on my tasks. But my mother-in-law didn't like my attitude. "Why are you ignoring me? How rude, especially with that tablet," she yelled. "Wait, mother-in-law, what are you?" Suddenly, she snatched the tablet from me and slammed it on the floor. Why would you do that?" To add insult to injury, my brother-in-law and his wife gleefully stomped on the tablet. The tablet screen cracked in several places, and it wouldn't even turn on. Holding the broken tablet, I was shocked to realize I couldn't continue my work. I tried several times, suppressing my anger to restart my work, but the tablet wouldn't revive. This incident made me realize that continuing to live with my mother-in-law was no longer feasible. So, I shared the incident over the phone with my husband. He was silent for a while, presumably in shock, but then repeatedly apologized. I didn't intend to blame my husband, but I was moved to tears by his kindness. When I told him that I wanted to live with him and not at his parents' house, he was happy. I had previously been worried about living in a remote location due to his transfer, but now I felt that being with him was more important. After deciding to move out, I immediately started preparing to relocate. But during this busy time, a surprising event occurred. Suddenly, my mother-in-law, brother-in-law, and his wife came to see me. Why are you here all of a sudden?" "I'm quite busy right now," I exclaimed in surprise. "Maggie, we heard you've been contributing $3,000 monthly. We're truly sorry about the other day. We didn't know until our son told us. We had no idea you were contributing so much." I could sense my mother-in-law's intentions. "I've told you this before. Anyway, I've decided to move out and live with my husband. Perhaps they realized that without me, they would lose the monthly financial support." "Maggie, don't say things like that. Let's all build a warm family together. Mother-in-law says if you leave, we have to pay $3,000. That's unbelievable. The reason Maggie got angry and left is because you broke that tablet, right?" "What are you talking about? It was Mom who broke the tablet first. Besides, all this happened because of Mom's misunderstanding." "That's right. It's not mother-in-law's fault. Maggie doesn't do housework or work. She just stays in her room all the time. In fact, it wasn't Maggie who was contributing money to the household." An argument started between my mother-in-law, brother-in-law, and his wife. For me, this argument was very bothersome. Without paying any attention to my mother-in-law, as I continued with my moving preparations, adding insult to injury, she said, "Maggie, I have a favor to ask. Without $3,000, we can't make ends meet. Even if you move to my son's place, won't you continue to send us living expenses?" She looked apologetic. "Why would I give money to dissolve our cohabitation?" I chuckled a bit. "Don't say things like that. What should I do from now on?" My mother looked troubled. "That's absolutely impossible." I shook my head. "I don't have any money." "Huh? I was putting $3,000 into the household every month, right? I thought that was more than enough for living expenses." After a moment of silence, my mother-in-law confessed, "I spent the money at a nightclub." I was lost for words. "You went to a nightclub? Mom, are you out of your mind?" My brother-in-law also angrily retorted, "Please, can you support my nightclub expenses?" After losing my husband, I've been trying so hard to live by myself. You can sympathize with me, right? My mother-in-law looked like she was about to cry. Absolutely not. I sighed deeply. My sister-in-law nodded in agreement. My mother-in-law's shoulders dropped. She was probably shocked at the idea of stopping her visits to the nightclub. However, I had no intention of helping her. Maggie, I'm sorry for the trouble my mother caused. Let's get along from now on. My brother-in-law apologized. That's impossible. I don't want to live with her and her family. But I firmly refused. After that, I started a peaceful life at the new location where my husband was transferred to. Now, we are enjoying our days in a serene town, and I can work peacefully. During this time, a thought suddenly crossed my mind, the bomb that I had left at my in-laws' place. Just as I was wondering about it, I received a call from my mother-in-law. Oh, mother-in-law, what's the matter? Maggie, what's the deal with the comic you drew? Eh? What about the comic I drew? You know, the comic you drew is all about our family, right? Maybe it was. Apparently, the comic drew caused a big uproar at my in-laws' house. It realistically depicted the treatment and words I received from my mother-in-law and the couple, and it seemed to resonate with people of my generation. Although I changed the names of the characters, some relatives knew I was a comic artist, and someone apparently realized it was about my in-laws. My brother-in-law, his wife, and mother-in-law seem to be under fire right now. Because of you, Maggie, everyone knows our secrets. What should we do? But aren't secrets like this bound to come out eventually? Now, how can we face everyone? They even found out I was going to a nightclub. It might be difficult, but please resolve it yourself. How cruel. Feeling a bit refreshed at my mother-in-law's outcry over the phone, I learned that the family faced many difficulties afterward. Due to the contents of my comic, angry relatives gathered at my in-laws, and it was revealed that my mother-in-law had spent a lot of money at the nightclub and was in debt. The debt was so massive that she couldn't repay it by herself. My in-laws had to sell their house to repay the debt, and my mother-in-law started living with my brother-in-law and his wife. It seems she started a part-time job to repay the debt, but it was a tough situation. My brother-in-law and his wife, already struggling financially, faced even more challenges living with my mother-in-law. Eventually, my sister-in-law couldn't take it anymore and left the house after an affair, leaving my brother-in-law deeply depressed. Although I feel sympathy, I can't help but think they brought it upon themselves. As for us, we are enjoying our new life in the countryside. Shortly after moving here, we were blessed with our long-awaited baby. Initially, I was anxious about moving from the city to the countryside, but this area, blessed with beautiful nature, has become an ideal living environment. With the stress gone, we are enjoying a comfortable life. Furthermore, my previous comic was well received, leading to a new fashion magazine job, so both my personal and professional lives are progressing smoothly. I can't help but feel grateful to my mother-in-law and her family for the opportunity to move forward.